Chapter 23 of Fuzzy Mud. Wednesday, November 3rd at 2 p.m. The ground was mostly soft under Tamaya's cold bare foot, but she had to step carefully to avoid the sticks and sharp rocks buried beneath the fallen leaves. Her rash had spread the full length of her arm, and she could see small red bumps on her other hand now, too. She tingled all over, although she couldn't be sure if that was caused by the mud or by her own heebie-jeebies. It seemed wherever she looked, there were more mud puddles. Yet, as bad as it was for her, she knew it had to be 10 times worse for Chad. At least she'd been able to go home yesterday. She'd been able to take a bath and change her clothes. "Chat!" She started to shout, then gasped and brought her hand almost to her mouth. Just ahead lay some kind of dead animal, half covered in muck and fuzz. She quickly turned her head away. It could have been a raccoon, or possibly a small dog. The mud made it hard to know, and she didn't want to look. She made a wide circle around it, carefully watching every step before gently setting her foot down. She wondered if there was anybody else, anywhere, who knew about the fuzzy mud. She had tried to tell Mrs. Latherley, but the school nurse had been more worried about peanut butter. Even Marshall hadn't seemed to get it. Was it possible that she was the only one in the whole world who knew? The thought scared her, but it was also what made her keep going. If not her, who? She was determined to make it to the hills on the other side of the gully. "Chad!" she shouted. "Are you out here?" As the slope of the hill became steeper, she needed to grab onto branches to keep from losing her balance. She bounced from tree to tree down toward the gully. There were fewer trees close to the gully, and the ground became even steeper. Tamaya could see down directly into the gully. It was more than half filled with fuzzy mud. She eased herself into a sitting position and rolled up the top of her lunch sack so nothing would spill. She slid down toward the mud, using her sneakered foot as a brake to keep from going too fast. The ground was too steep, and she started to turn sideways. She pulled at a clump of weeds to steady herself, but the weeds ripped out of the ground and she flipped over onto her stomach. Her knees scraped across jagged rocks, and then her foot slammed into a large boulder, finally stopping her. She clutched another clump of weeds to try to hold herself in place as she carefully moved her other foot to the boulder for more support. Looking over her shoulder, she saw that she was only a few feet from the edge of the gully. A thin layer of fuzzy scum rose from it like smoke. Not too far away, she could see the flat top of a rock embedded in the dirt. It would make a good jumping-off spot. It looked to be about a 6-foot jump from one side of the gully to the other. She moved, crab-like, along the slope toward the flat-topped rock. She dug her fingernails into the dirt to keep from slipping. She knew she'd have to move quickly. If she hesitated for even half a second, she could end up in the mud. She pushed herself up, spun around, and slammed her sneakered foot down on the rock. She jumped and hit the other side only inches above the mud. Using her momentum, she scrambled upward, away from the gully. It wasn't until she was walking again, following a dry creek bed, that she noticed the pain from all the bruises on her hands, arms, knees, and legs. Her shirt had rolled up a bit during her slide, and she had scratches and scrapes on her stomach as well. Still, she knew the pain was nothing compared to Chad's. "Chad!" The creek bed wound its way upward between the two hills she had seen from the other side of the gully. She kept looking from one hill to the other, hoping to see Marshall's rocky ledge, although she knew that even if she found it, that didn't mean Chad was still nearby. "Chad!" Her throat was dry, and her weak voice had gotten even weaker. For a second, she thought she heard something. She stopped and listened. The woods were silent. Looking back the way she had come, she wondered if she'd ever find her way out of there. She didn't want to have to cross the gully again. She heard a noise. Twigs were breaking, and then footsteps. The steps were uneven, like someone was stomping and staggering. Then she saw him. He crashed his way through a tangle of twigs and thin branches. She froze. "I'm here!" he called, but his voice was little more than a raspy whisper. He took several deep, uneven breaths, then continued to push his way toward her. "I'm here," he repeated weakly. His face was a mass of blisters, crusted with pus and dried blood, and so badly swollen she could hardly see his eyes. She started to bring her hand to her mouth, then stopped herself, not wanting to get the rash on her lips or tongue. He came closer. "Where'd you go?" he called from only a few feet away. He sank to his knees. "I'm right here," he whimpered. "Where'd you go?" She felt overwhelmed with feelings of horror, revulsion, and pity. When she spoke softly. Are you hungry? 2 times 1,048,576 equals 2,097,152. 2 times 2,097,152 equals 4,194,304.